This is not getting discussed on the mainstream media. Not only are they wrong legally, but the fact that they would do this is outrageous. This is an overreaction and really nonsense. How would you react if this was your son or your daughter? It's the offense of knowing the truth. It's the offense of having an alternate worldview. Saying God bless you to someone is not a violation of the law. Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. And this is a special series we've put together dealing with the current case that we're engaged in involving the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and their targeting of conservative and Christian organizations, including pro-life organizations. Can you imagine that the IRS is actually asking people in formal written documentation what the contents of their prayers are, who they've talked to, who they associate with? Well, that is the nature of the lawsuit we're involved in, and we brought in some really significant experts in this field, both in the political realm and the legal realm, to really discuss this with you. First, coming right up, is Michelle Bachmann. Now, you know her as a congresswoman from Minnesota. She's well known in conservative circles. But what you may not know is that Michelle Bachmann actually served in the office of chief counsel for the Internal Revenue Service. In fact, the very same office that I served in right out of law school. Let's start with some common experience that you and I both had. And that was, as this IRS scandal was first made public, the argument was that the White House was putting out, and the IRS for that matter, was this was two rogue agents in a field office in Cincinnati. And you and I have represented those field office agents, and we knew it wasn't true. Talk about some of your experience in Chief Counsel's office, which of course is now the center of this whole controversy, and this whole idea that these were rogue agents.
Right, and I was a federal tax litigation attorney in the Office of Chief Counsel. Those are the lawyers for the IRS that represent the cases, whether it's civil cases, criminal cases, that's what we do. So we deal with everyone up and down the food chain in the IRS, whether it's IRS agents or appeals agents or revenue or collection, we deal with all of them. Right. And during the course of this story, as it began to unfold, I knew immediately, as I'm sure you did, right, that it was impossible that it was two low-level,
rogue.
They made it very clear it was low-level staffers who were rogue who had made this independent decision. I knew it was impossible because in my office I had books this thick. They were operation manuals of standard operating procedures. So when I did my work as a federal tax lawyer, I had to check every box to make sure that I didn't do anything out of the norm. And once my work product was completed, that went to my supervisor, that went to his supervisor, on up the food chain, so to speak, to make sure that everything I did was carefully done so that no taxpayer's information would ever have an unauthorized disclosure.
Right.
That's how careful the IRS was because people's privacy was highly respected. And I can say with certainty whether people were left-leaning or right-leaning, that is what our mission was, to make sure that we correctly dealt with the tax law, but also no unauthorized disclosure.
You know, when they said the rogue agent issue, I was thinking about my experience, and we both have had this, I represented these agents. I mean, these agents almost were like your client in a sense. I mean, the government was your client, but you were looking at their case. Sometimes you had to correct them, but I never had a situation in hundreds of cases where the agents freewheeling started writing letters with questions in it like this. You mentioned the Internal Revenue Manual, that's what we called it. The IRMs would be sitting in our desks, and these agents had the same thing. They had for their audits, they had their checklists. So when those letters came out asking people for membership lists, if they prayed with another person, what their content of their prayer was, why they have a pro-life position, there is no way that those agents on their own could have done that.
I'm glad you're bringing it up because your son, Jordan Sekulow, was with myself. We had a major press conference here just a stone's throw from where the ACLJ office is right now. And we had from across the nation members of the Tea Party. And one after another, they went to the microphone and told their story, which is the IRS wanted to know the content of our prayers because we were for the state of Israel. All of the reasons that they were giving these questions, I'd never heard of anything like that before because we were supposed to focus on, do you have the correct deductions? Do you have the right credits? Are you overstating your income? Are you overstating deductions? Are you understating income? Those are the kind of things we looked for. We never looked for ideology. It didn't matter what you thought about ideology. This was a case of first impression. Yeah. I have never before seen an instance where the IRS was interested in what you thought. Before, the IRS was only interested, are you paying what you're supposed to pay? And that's what the IRS was supposed to be about.
I could not agree more with Congressman Bachmann about the IRS way off of their mission. The idea that this organization, this huge corporate bureaucracy, government bureaucracy, has targeted conservative and Christian organizations, and they admit it, should be an outrage to everyone, no matter what your political perspective might be. You should not be targeted for your ideological views, your theological views, your political views. They tried that against the civil rights movement, and it didn't work out, as it should not have worked out. Then the IRS was held accountable ultimately. The same is true here. You cannot use an agency of the government to target your, quote, enemies, end quote, because you disagree with their theology, their beliefs, and their practices. So we've got a lot more to talk about ahead, but let me tell you what we're doing. We are working aggressively to end the abuse, and it's very simple. The IRS as an agency, as we know it, needs to go. If you want to stop the IRS abuse of these private organizations, these Christian organizations, and reformat the IRS to be very different than it is right now, let me encourage you to call the numbers on your screen that add your name to a petition that is growing well over 200,000 people. ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. That's ACLJ.org or 877-989-2255. I urge you to sign now. We're going to end this abuse by the IRS. Back with more in a moment.
The Internal Revenue Service scandal is getting worse. Now there are new revelations of the IRS targeting Tea Party and conservative groups, disturbing admissions that the IRS scheme was even more partisan and more coordinated than previously thought. The American Center for Law and Justice represents 41 groups in a federal lawsuit challenging the IRS. We intend to get to the bottom of this unlawful and unconstitutional scheme, an out-of-control IRS that intentionally targeted conservative organizations, violating their First Amendment rights. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Add your name by calling 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.
What you're seeing today are actually almost outtakes from our movie. These are segments and scenes that are not in the actual movie Tax Invasion. We've got an in-depth report in this movie, and you need to see it. It's available for free. I think right now we're over 70,000 people have viewed this in just a few weeks. It's a free digital download. You just go to irsmovie.com. Here's the trailer.
Every year, Americans spend about $500 billion on tax compliance.
Yep.
As we like to say in Texas, that doesn't produce a single truck or tortilla. It's just wasted.
Are we going to have a nation that's for of and by the people, or a nation that is totally controlled by the government?
If men were angels, there'd be no need of masters. We don't have angels running these bureaucracies.
Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, they're horrified at this because no one wants to think, you know what, I supported one candidate, the other guy won, and now I'm going to be audited or punished or have my business closed down.
I was in our building and the knock came on the door. And the first thing I saw was a badge. IRS, sir, I need to speak with you.
An agency that's supposed to be working for the people was really working against the people.
There are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible.
The very foundation of our government was the idea that we could criticize the government when we disagree. That's what First Amendment free speech is all about. The Founding Fathers had a very different vision than what the Internal Revenue Service has.
Attempts to turn this into a scandal have failed.
Well, as you see from this movie trailer we just showed you, this IRS case is deep. You're going to learn in just a few moments. One of the major concerns we've had is that the IRS, Lois Lerner, who is in charge of tax exempt, actually shared information, taxpayer information, confidential taxpayer information, with the Federal Election Commission. They're not allowed to do that. Take a listen to Michelle Bachmann. I represented in my work at the IRS with individuals that were in the tax exempt group. And they also were very structured and regulated at what they said. So here you've got an acknowledged targeting of conservative groups, Tea Party groups, but the net actually went a little bit broader than Tea Party groups because you had other conservative organizations. We've done a data analysis. There are no progressive groups that got anywhere. They were all looked at. Anybody that applies for exemption got looked at, but they did not get questioning like this. I mean, it's 100 to 1.
And we've even had an admission now
Yes.
that it wasn't equal. There's no moral equivalence between progressive groups and conservative
Right.
groups. So that's a myth.
Right. We now know that Lois Lerner was also sharing information with the Federal Election Commission.
That's right.
How does that, I mean, they're talking about disclosure of tax. One of the big requirements you and I had was you don't disclose taxpayer information. It's a crime.
You cannot, because then you, as a federal employee of the IRS, you are in trouble. You will have loss. You will face loss of job. You may have to do a criminal process as well. So this is very serious. People that work in the system know how serious this is. Lois Lerner was in a highly sensitive position, being at the head of tax exempt.
Right.
But she was obviously in contact with a lawyer at the FEC and was sharing information, interestingly, on the American Future Fund.
Right.
And apparently it was at the request, this is according to a National Review article,
Right.
it was at the request of the Minnesota Democrat
Party.
Farmer Labor Party, which in my home state of Minnesota, that's the Democrat Party. But here's the kicker. There was so much attention on this race. This was Al Franken versus Norm Coleman. This was in 2008. Why was this important? This race would determine whether or not Barack Obama had 60 Democrat senators in the Senate. If he had 60 senators, he was filibuster-proof and he could pass Obamacare. That's why everything depended on this Minnesota Senate race. It would mean we would get Obamacare, or it would mean President Obama would get Obamacare. It would mean he would get Dodd-Frank. Because Al Franken won that race because the Minnesota Democrat Farmer Labor Party was extremely concerned that the American Future Fund would not be able to weigh into that Senate race, and their tax-exempt status was in the line. There was a lot that was hanging in the balance. This became ground zero in the 2008 campaign, and of course we know today, because Al Franken was declared the winner, now we have Obamacare, now we have Dodd-Frank.
Which brings up another question. The IRS plays a...
Political.
Yeah.
Highly political in what is supposed to be a non-political agency.
Right. So your background is, as mine, a federal tax lawyer representing the government.
Mm-hmm.
We served in the Office of Chief Counsel. You're a constitutional lawyer, as I am. And you look at the IRS situation as it now is unfolding here before the American people's eyes, and every day it's different.
Yeah.
What do you do with the IRS? What do you do with the tax code?
Well, I would abolish it, number one, and I don't think that's overly melodramatic. I really do believe that we need to abolish the tax code, but also abolish the IRS. This system isn't working. In fact, now it is going to morph into a Frankenstein once we have the federal data hub. And you want to talk about rogue agents?
Yeah.
When you have got literally tens of thousands of rogue IRS agents, because this is something that I think would be very important
Right.
for your viewers
Absolutely.
to know, is this. The IRS, if you thought they were a pain in the neck once a year, if you own a small business, if you're an employer, the IRS now has to be in your books every pay period.
To determine
At
compliance.
minimum once a month.
Right.
To determine if your small business is in compliance, and if you aren't.
With Obamacare.
With Obamacare. Because Obamacare is going to be the net that is spread across the United States government, because all 320 million Americans will come under the net of the Internal Revenue Code and under the net of Obamacare. So you want to talk about Big Brother? This is Big Brother on steroids.
Yep.
And the IRS, we're going to have future Lois Lerners who know everything about us and have the ability to get that data and share that data. There's no end to the tyranny that we're looking at. And that's why I think the American people are right to distrust what's going on in Washington right now. They have every reason to distrust. And that's why we have to abolish Obamacare, abolish the IRS, abolish the tax code, and come up with a fairer system, whether it is a fair tax, which is a national
Right.
income
Or a
sales
flat
tax,
tax.
or a flat tax where we all pay the same percentage. We need to have that debate. You and I would love to lead a national
Right.
debate on what we would replace the IRS with. The IRS has got to go, as far as I'm
Right.
concerned. It's served its
I'm with
purpose,
you.
unworkable, it's got to be done.
Yep.
And that's not a an odd political statement. That's not a melodramatic statement. We're at a crucial time right now where our liberties will be denied because of this new system through Obamacare and the IRS.
Well, we already know that 100,000, at least 100,000 donors to political campaigns, information and data was released. I've said that the government, I believe, the IRS especially, but I think this goes for some other agencies as well, they're institutionally incapable of self-correcting at this point. That's why I'm with you on, I think the IRS code needs to go. The IRS, as we know it, needs to go. We need a system that makes sense. This one does not. The tax code's got more, I mean, is it tax?
It's guilty as charged.
Yeah, I mean,
if you and
yes.
I were putting the lawsuit on right now, if
Right.
we were trying the IRS in a court of fairness,
Right.
would they pass the test
No.
of being the agency that they're commissioned to be? No, they do not.
Right.
They are guilty.
Right.
Therefore, their punishment needs to be that they need to go away.
Right. But let's talk about this idea, this concept right now that the FBI is investigating the IRS. And I say this because I just received, a few days ago, the motions for an extension of time from the government to respond to our lawsuit representing these 41 conservative groups. Now, I wasn't not anticipating that. You expect that in this kind of litigation. We consented to it because lawyers, that's what we do. We gave them additional time. But in their motion, I'm not saying anything out of school here. This is in their motion. They say, look, we can't get you the responses to this because we've got 35 inquiries from Congress, oversight hearings with Congress, and then they said the FBI is investigating the IRS. We have to determine if those individual people that have been sued are entitled to independent representation. Does the government have to pay for it? They've got this, quote, mess on their hands. It was Eric Holder that said the IRS may have committed criminal acts here. We never said the word criminal. It was Eric Holder. And then the president says these are phony scandals.
Well, and I think you've just also mentioned the principle of justice delayed is justice denied.
Sure.
And I think you've laid out very well the fact that now we've created this monster with Obamacare, with the IRS, and with the FBI. We will never have enough bureaucrats to fully have true
Real
oversight of this system. That's why when it's that complicated, you can hide almost anything. It's one more reason why Obamacare has to be repealed and why the IRS has to be repealed, because it's impossible. If men were angels, there'd be no need of masters.
Right.
And so that's what we know in these bureaucracies. We don't have angels running these bureaucracies. They need oversight. What you just found out in this motion is there will never be sufficient manpower or resources to affect true justice in oversight. So how will you as an organization ever know that you're getting the justice you deserve, or me as an individual,
Right.
or a member of Congress? People feel far less safe now than they did before because government is so big and so invasive that we've truly lost our liberty to an unaccountable bureaucracy.
And completely untrustworthy.
Completely
the trust
untrustworthy.
factor.
It's gone. It's gone.
Werfel, the acting commissioner, said, my job is to get the trust of the American people back. It's not going to happen. End of the day, what happens here? If we do nothing, or if Congress does nothing, or if the government stalls delays,
well, God
what
help
happens?
us. We better do something. What happens? The American people aren't going to let this go because, let's face it, the media isn't going to do this.
Right.
They're not going to bird dog this thing out. If this is the only thing we do, this is worth seeing it through to the end, because why? You explained it very clearly. The IRS is going to get an enhanced position of power in our lives and in American life. And right now, we've got to expose the truth for what it is. And we need to demand that our members abolish the IRS, abolish the tax code, but they've got to see this issue through because it impacts each one of your listeners. We're all impacted by the IRS. No one in this country, whether you're an organization, a tax exempt, a company, a church, doesn't matter who you are, or pastor, we are all impacted by the IRS. We've got to see this through because this appears to be criminal activity that was perpetrated to re-elect a president of the United States. That's pretty devastating, and that's a member of Congress saying that on the record. That's why we've got to band together as one and stand with you. This is a very important issue, and we have to see this through because all of our liberties are on the line.
Michelle Bachmann's right. Liberty is literally on the line. And it's not just for these organizations that have been targeted. The idea that a government agency could go after you because they disagree with your political position or your beliefs or your practices should be sending shockwaves through everyone that's concerned about freedom and liberty. And that's why we're fighting back. And I encourage you to join with us in that fight. If you want to be part of the team, you could do so by going to ACLJ.org and signing that petition right now online to end the IRS abuse and to reform the IRS, eliminate it as we know it. That's ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. Again, it's ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. We want you to sign that petition. When we come back, more on the outrage of the IRS.
The Internal Revenue Service scandal is getting worse. Now there are new revelations of the IRS targeting Tea Party and conservative groups, disturbing admissions that the IRS scheme was even more partisan and more coordinated than previously thought. The American Center for Law and Justice represents 41 groups in a federal lawsuit challenging the IRS. We intend to get to the bottom of this unlawful and unconstitutional scheme. An out-of-control IRS that intentionally targeted conservative organizations, violating their First Amendment rights. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Add your name by calling 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. A lot of the discussion that has been taking place regarding the IRS cases is focused on what's called Tea Party organizations. But the fact of the matter is, a number of the organizations that were targeted by the IRS were Christian ministries engaged in sharing the gospel. One group sharing the gospel in Washington, D.C. Reverend Rob Shank, a very good friend of ours, he heads up Faith in Action. He's been involved in sharing the gospel and ministering to those in leadership in Washington, D.C. for decades. Well, he found his organization targeted by the IRS. Here's his story.
We have been a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're properly registered in the District of Columbia.
How long have you been a nonprofit?
We've been incorporated since 1982.
So we're talking over 30 years.
Over 30 years. We have never had trouble with the IRS until around 2008, when we started getting some inquiry letters. And they were not the...
It wasn't an audit letter, it was just requesting some information.
That's right, just requesting additional information. Then 2 years later, well, let's see if I count it right, that was 2008. No, only a year later.
So in 2009?
In 2009, I was in our building, which is located on Capitol Hill. I was in my office after hours.
A couple of buildings down from here.
Yeah, just on the same block. Immediately behind the Supreme Court. We're a block from the Capitol, 10 minutes from the White House. And I happened to be in the building. The staff had gone home for the day. It was evening, and the knock came on the door. And I usually don't answer the door after hours. There are security issues. There's all kinds of reasons I wouldn't. But I did. On this occasion, I happened to open the door, and the first thing I saw was a badge. And I was startled by it. But when I looked again, it was
Department of Treasury, Internal Revenue
Department of
Service.
Treasury. And the woman who was holding the badge said, IRS, sir, I need to speak with you.
Did she know who you were? Or she just was?
No.
No, okay, she didn't know who you were at that point, but she knew the organization.
That's right, that's right.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, she did ask my name.
Right.
And she said, what is your position with the organization? I said, I'm the president. She said, well, I need to come in and ask you some questions. And I had been told all my professional career, don't pick a fight with the IRS. You will lose. That was the rule. And it booted up in me. Mm-hmm. Don't fight with these people. I can only be on the losing end of that equation. So maybe naively, but I invited her in. I was very cordial. I was very cooperative. But the first thing she asked me for was literature on our organization. And I just thought that was peculiar.
So the agent asked you a series of questions and wants to see your literature.
Wants to see our literature, wanted to see a list of our top donors.
Right.
Which I found highly unusual. First
what did you say to her?
Well, I was kind of flabbergasted, and I remember saying, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that. She said, sir, it doesn't matter whether you're comfortable or not. You have to show it to me. The last correspondence I saw was April of 2011. When finally everything went quiet.
you do realize now that April of 2011 is when the Chief Counsel's Office of the IRS met with its own staff and ultimately Treasury and the White House to discuss this whole problem, which you were encountering firsthand. And the last series of letters that went out from that problem created by the IRS was April of 2011.
Well, everything just grew suddenly silent. Just kind of
Which is what happened in all the
disappeared.
cases, right? Do you think, looking back at it now, it's hindsight again, that's not the way the system's supposed to work. Do you feel like you were part of that target?
There is no doubt that this has an effect to inhibit religious liberty, religious freedom. Because first of all, it gives groups like ours pause. We're thinking twice. Okay, now wait a minute, do we really want to get out there and say these things? Because there could be more payback. There could be more, is the IRS going to come back after us again? It forces you to review your policies and statements in a way we never did before. We felt we were entirely protected under the First Amendment, but this is a free country, and we have the right to say what we want to say, within reason, of course, but I mean, we had always had that freedom. We had always exercised it. Now, we have to have second thoughts about it, and we didn't have them prior to this experience.
Well, there is no doubt that the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and freedom of religion and the freedom of association are under attack. And that's why we want you to stand up and fight back and join us in this effort. You can do so by going to aclj.org or calling us at 1-877-989-2255. That's aclj.org or 877-989-2255. When you make that call, you are standing up and speaking out against what the IRS is doing and demanding that the IRS as an entity that, as we know it today, be changed, modified, and eliminated, and that this abuse of the IRS stop. I don't believe the IRS is institutionally capable of self-correcting. So that's why we're fighting back. And again, it's aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255. We'll talk to you next week.
The Internal Revenue Service scandal is getting worse. Now there are new revelations of the IRS targeting Tea Party and conservative groups, disturbing admissions that the IRS scheme was even more partisan and more coordinated than previously thought. The American Center for Law and Justice represents 41 groups in a federal lawsuit challenging the IRS. We intend to get to the bottom of this unlawful and unconstitutional scheme, an out-of-control IRS that intentionally targeted conservative organizations, violating their First Amendment rights. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Add your name by calling 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.